is going to be kind of more towards like exploring the idea about how to make color bass, the actual bass itself, not the rhythm style drums and all that, because you can go and look up or just download something off of Splice. This is not wine or spirits, it's kombucha, which is fermented tea. But dude, the number one thing that I get all the time, how do you make color bass? And to be honest, I don't know, other than the tutorials that I watched. So it's really important for me to be transparent about things, about talking about things that I don't know or that I've never done before. So this is the first like color bass that I've made, and it's in the works. But as opposed to telling you how to do it, we're going to be taking a look at some of the things that I've done in order to get you some of the steps to get there, if that makes sense. Because for me personally, like I wouldn't like throw this in a tune by any means, and like mixing is a whole different deal with this. But we want to kind of talk about the qualities, the timbre, the other stuff in here. Now, the reason why I'm doing this live is because I can rely on chat. And a lot of chat has actually done this before. I've even had some really cool submissions for people that have done color bass. So if you want to add your input into this, I think that this would be a cool way to go about this. The stream will be available to all my viewers. Sorry, members. it's one stream, right? And it's probably something that most of us don't care about. So anyways, let's go ahead and talk about this thing, this silly thing. Okay, so this is broken down into two different layers, and of course, like the biggest thing about this is that it's vocoded. But what is being vocoded, and how do you kind of use some of the things that are on here in order to constitute like different changes and different timbres and stuff, right? So for the most part, one cool way is to take a supersaw that has heavy transients and use that spectral time with the shift of when I say and then vocode and OTT. Okay, so yeah, I'm not too far off. But the way that I've gone about this is I've taken a super saw that sounds like this. And so the two things that are kind of characterizing this is that I'm actually using the rhythm of the MIDI placement here in order to kind of create the movement as far as like the rhythm goes. But there's like, you'll see here in a second how this synergizes, but for the most part, it's just a pretty simple super saw. If we go into something like Faceplant, then you will see that it's just some saw stacks. So on the top layer, we added some sync. It's 4 voices, just detuned slightly. And then we have an octave higher that's playing the exact same thing, except we've turned on some stereo information and we're covering that with noise. So like a lot of times when you see people doing like layering and stuff, especially for some reason in Ableton, but in other DAWs it makes sense, but you can get a bunch of different layers out of a single synth, provided that you know what I mean, kind of know what to do with it. And for this particular case, like you can have almost as many oscillators and generators as you want. And if you want to, you can actually split those and send them through parallel between each ones in case if you want to have like specific effects and stuff. For me, I like the way that I work these days is the less tracks, the better. It's kind of like a, I guess you would say like STEM mentality, so to speak. And I'm not saying that it has to be done that way, but that's kind of the way that I go about doing this. But this is pretty basic, and by all means, it's just push up the high end just a little bit and then add some reverb. I don't even know if the reverb matters or something that I was messing with, but we're going to explore that more after I talk about the patch in just a second. So where I'm getting the chords from is actually Cthulhu, Shish Kebab. And I just have F minor to G sharp major, and then I just wrote a little bit of a line, and that's pretty much how you can get that. There's a lot of different ways to grab chords. Frick, man, if you're desperate, just grab the Unison MIDI chord pack like everybody else is doing. I don't have it, I don't own it, I have Cthulhu, but you have options. So let's go ahead and turn this off, and on its own, this little bass sounds like this. Okay, so something to keep in mind of like how I made this work in the first place is that after I made these chords, one thing that I like about this particular program is that you can actually see what the root note is of here. And so I just kind of harmonized or tried to match the root note. And this is an F minor / G sharp major, and those go well together, and XYZ, and you know, the chord theory, or sorry, music theory. And music theory is a big part of this music. That's something that I'm lacking in, so I'm using tools to kind of help me make up for those weaknesses, so to speak. But yeah, basically, if you already are pretty proficient at making chords, then you can just do that and make them as elaborate as you want. I didn't find that really necessary. So this bass in particular is actually pretty easy, but there's a couple of like mixed things to keep in mind. So like at its core, whenever I hear stuff, for the most part, it's not like super crazy modulated basses and stuff as like the fundamental. And I think what you're trying to go for here is to have something that kind of matches the bite or of either a saw or a square, something that has a little bit of harmonics in the low mid region in that sense, and then something with a relatively clean sub. And so kind of like if we're talking about layering and stuff, I've got one group over here that's a sine wave. It's got this crunch FM wavetable that it's being pushed through. So if I turn all this other stuff off, let me make sure that's on. We've got something kind of like this. And that's pretty much it for that. Now on this, because we're splitting it into two different groups, I've added a high pass filter on here. And then one thing that can be really helpful, especially if you've got like some detuned waves or something, is to kind of notch somewhere around the low mids out. It does make a big difference, especially when you're trying to layer on saws and stuff, because it's really easy for your whole mix to get muddy. So, and then we can kind of bring some of it back or try to level it out with a little bit of distortion. Then this is just a sub. Let me turn this off, with a little bit of distortion as well. So that way it's nice and thick. And then I'm making sure to kind of roll off any of that mid harmonic stuff, because this is going to sound like a square if it's not. So that way everything kind of flows together nicely. You can see right here that I'm boosting the highs just a little bit, and then the limiter is just there just in case. It's I don't know. I always put a limiter on everything. That's just a good rule of thumb. So that moves on into the next part, which is kind of grouping this and the kind of signal flow in that way. The bottom is just a clean signal. There's nothing going on right here. So, and then of course, like there's a matter of mixing to kind of play with this, but that's why I said like this is still in the midst of being designed. But on the vocoder, we've actually got a few cool things going on. I'm going to talk about the vocoder first, and let me turn off all the other modulator effects and also the reverb and all this other stuff, I think, just for now, because it will make a difference. Actually, I'd argue that most of this stuff is just corrective anyways, but all right, so by default, the vocoder has a brown noise carrier, and that's actually like an effect grid. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's actually a polygrid, I want to say, and it's kind of a self-generating thing. So that's kind of just something that you can use if you actually want to like go in and do stuff and like actually make cool things within the grid. I think that's actually a really fun way to explore. And I'd even argue that like, that there might be some cool things that you can do by sending MIDI through this and like creating a cool, interesting grid patch and all that, and using that as your carrier. But for now, we're just using the audio receiver to which we're taking in the audio from phase plant. So if we were to just listen to this at 100% here, let me make sure that this is soloed. Okay, so by default, everything is at 100% wet, and that's because if it's not, it doesn't, at least for this particular scenario, it doesn't really give the formanty type of vibe that you want to do. But I really just want to talk about the vocoder in the first place, because like a vocoder, that's really like, how do I explain this? When it comes to color bass, there's a few like key characteristics that really make this work. The first thing is that you're playing chords into your vocoder. The second is that you have a vocoder in the first place. And then on top of that, you can also do like the resonator stuff. And then what was the other one? The, help me guys, convolution reverb. Zebra was saying that you can also do like a short delay, but in a sense, like if you take a short delay, then it will actually become a resonator, which does bring up a good point. A vocoder is your passport to a career in rap hop. I mean, I guess like is auto-tuning really a vocoder though? Um, but yeah, so like those are like the key characteristics. And then you send that through an FM bass, and then you kind of just try to find a way to level that out. So it's like chord stacking, but with the vocoder on it um, into some kind of FM bass or something like that. And that's pretty much what constitutes that. But there's a couple of things that you might be looking for on the vocoder itself that might help you get some key characteristics. So for example, if I have this turned on, the formant is going to give you very specific things. The brightness of this is going to give you very specific things. The bands are going to give you specific things. The attack and release, these all make a big difference in how this sounds. So let's just go ahead and talk about how some of this stuff works. And then we'll also talk about the modulator itself. I'd say vocoder is closer to a synth than auto-tune. Yeah, but just in the context of what's it called? In the context of vocals in today's rap music, right? So if I just play the chord, nothing is actually happening, so I guess I need to... Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just maybe turn this down just a little bit so you guys can hear what I'm saying over this. But I'm going to start to change the formant and the brightness, and I just want you to be aware of what it does. Academically, the formant shifts the formant, and the brightness makes it either seem like it's focusing just more so. It's like a filter almost. It focuses more on the low end or focuses more on the high end. And yeah, I think it's better to just demonstrate. So... Okay, so we got that one. Now let's talk about the brightness. Pretty much your filter. If it moves to the left, it's a low pass. If it moves to the right, it's a high pass filter. But there's more things to consider with this. We've also got the band size, which is how many bands the formant is split up into. So for this one, I've got it set to stereo with as many bands as possible, which for the Bitwig vocoder, it's 80. But if you turn the bands down, or you make it in mono, it does make a big difference too. And I'd argue for like a bigger synth sound, you probably want to use the stereo ends. And I'm not really worried about this because generally, as a rule of thumb, if nobody has told you in other tutorials, not saying it doesn't exist, but you separate the vocoded stuff, take out the low ends, and you want to replace it with a solid sub for this particular instance, just because you don't want vocoded sub bass. There are instances, I think creatively, where you can make it work, but if you're chasing that specific sound, split it. High and low, or vocoded and clean, or you have options, but those are the possibilities that we want to talk about. So for this in particular, we also want to kind of mess around with the bands to see if that does something different. And right now you can see that this is full range, so everything from 20 hertz to 20K is being affected. Typically, like, because you're cutting out the low end, like, have it affect everything and then just play around and see what that does. But let's go ahead and mess with the bands now. Not as effective. That actually didn't sound bad. Cool, so now we're going to go ahead and talk about the bandpass size. So like everything is kind of being bandpassed in one way or another, and the resonance size of the percentage value is going to kind of change that. And the less value, the more water it becomes, and then the higher value, I think generally that opens up the bandpass a little bit wider. So, or the resonance is pulled down actually, because it makes it, you'll see. So take a listen to this. This is on just a regular wide setting right now, filter shape, broader setting, but it sounds like this, which kind of makes it sound like those like additive chimes. And then the more that you open it up, then you can kind of see that it kind of constitutes that in that way. It kind of brings back some of the carrier sound as opposed to just the vocoded resonances if it's too sharp. But you can also set this to a sharper value, which I think that's a 4 steeper, probably a 4 pole slope. Let's go ahead and do the same thing where it's going to be super thin now. So for this, it actually doesn't sound that good if you start to go higher. And for me, I think the best setting that I found was somewhere around, I think it was like 120 or whatever. Yeah. And then, but the cool thing about this is like, because we have the ability to kind of work within Bitwig, I've already kind of thrown an LFO on here. And normally, like when I'm designing things, I would go for randomization and all that because of the way that I work and workflows and all that. But if you're trying to use something that's actually usable, then you want it to be a little bit more predictable in that sense. So it would make sense to use an LFO, maybe say on the formant. But there's more that we can do with that. For one, we can mess with the size of this. Let's make it a little bit more dramatic. Now, I'm not saying that's cool, and I'm not saying that's what you should do, but what you should be doing is exploring and playing with different things that are introducing that movement in order to get a more unique sound, if that makes sense. But there's more to talk about too. This also includes an attack and release, and this actually makes a big difference too. For example, let's just go ahead and keep that playing. You can see that it's changing the sound, how this goes. For me, I think like having a short attack on this would kind of activate the whole vocoding thing, and I think that would be better. But the release also makes a difference too. Now, this is actually kind of interesting because you can see that if the release is shorter, then it kind of has that more watery sound. And so that can be something that you might want to incorporate as well. And you can supplement that or bring some of that stuff back by giving it some saturation and then adding something like the context of a reverb. Actually, the reverb was in that. And so you might want to, you know what I mean, just like... which actually sounds like a pretty cool layer. So, you know what I mean? Like there's different things that you might want to explore with that. But for this particular case, I think that I liked it somewhere around that region. So that pretty much is like what goes into like a basic functionality of the vocoder in itself. Now that we know to send the super saws into there, or we're also going to send some other stuff into there just to maybe explore to some extent. But that's kind of one thing that you can do in order to be able to like find different bases and stuff that work for you. Now, on the modulator side of things, there's actually more to explore, and I actually had to go and look this up and to make sure that I was going to know what I was talking about. But if you click on this and we go into the help menu, it says up here that the effects chain that processes / replaces the device's input signal. So this is almost like pre-effects, I would say, and then whose spectrum is analyzed and imbued on with the carrier. So what that means is like, yeah, it's kind of like pre-effects in that sense. With the low release, you can try dropping an octave on the bass end. Okay, we'll come back to it. I got a groove going. Let me finish that out. So in that particular sense, like you definitely can put something before this if you wanted to, but what I've gone and done is actually added a resonator bank. And the resonator bank is actually really freaking cool when it comes to stuff like color bass, because you can create a chord. You can create a chord out of it, and there's a few different options that you can do with this. This has 1, 2, 6 different poles or 6 different points that you can use in order to create that chord, but the cool thing about this is that you can also do key tracking. So it sounds like you need a pretty harmonically rich source. I think for the context of like quote-unquote color bass, yes, you need something, you need to send something harmonically rich through it, and harmonically even, as to say, as like multiple notes or something, right? But with the resonator bank, what I've done is just made sure that this starts at the root note, which is C. That's our first chord. It's in C something. I don't know. My friends can help me out. But what you can do on this is actually set it to key track. And so even though the chord that you play on this is going to kind of jump around and all that, it doesn't make that big of a difference as far as like making it sound off, but it does make the resonator bank move. And so you can kind of see that like it does give it a little bit more hollowness in that sense, and I don't know, it does give it a little bit more hollowness in that sense, and so that's why this can kind of be kind of cool if you want to send it into the modulator before it reaches the carrier. Likewise, you can also put it on the outside of this, but I find that like with resonators and stuff, I want them to not be so obvious. And to me, I think that this was like the best case scenario or the coolest place that I found for this patch in order to make that fit in. But the cool thing about this, and something that I've been exploring, is like instead of putting something typical like your resonator or whatever, like I've been like, all right, well, what does it sound like if I throw something completely bonkers in here? And I haven't found anything like cool by any means yet. But what happens if you do something like this? Which, you know what I mean? Like there's that whole side of the theory as well. Which is actually, in some cases, kind of cool. It doesn't work for the whole thing, but maybe you can bounce this out a few times and see if like there are some cool bits and moments and use that to resample. Likewise, you can also do the same thing by placing this on the carrier aspect of things after this, which can also be kind of cool. Or you can take this and place it on the entirely outside of this, and this in particular has a lot of different like pitching and stuff involved, but at the same time, wait, is this going up or down? It's going down, so you want, yeah, so you want that to be a slower speed. You can still get some interesting timbres that might work as like supplemental sounds to your chord. So it would sound something kind of like this. Color neurobass, which can sometimes be advantageous in some way or another. But I've got videos on how to do this stuff all throughout my YouTube channel. And then also, if you feel really lazy, then I've got a bunch of these presets for sale on the Eternum on my website. It's in the description. So yeah, but in that sense, like don't just like stop at the carrier of being like, oh, I have to send super saws through this. Like we can try other things, which we will in just a second, but like it shouldn't just stop at make a super saw and then that's it. The chord aspect is already there, and now it's kind of like trying to figure out how to change some of the timbres in that way or send different signals through that in order to do that, right? So I would say that like the vocoder is the catalyst, and you also have to like the input variable also has to be something of like chord nature. But what happens if you send bells through it? What happens if you send triangles through it? What happens if you send like different FM sounds through it that are totally different? So that's kind of something that we should be looking at in order to evolve this particular sound in general. And while it is still kind of like a new spin, because we've actually been using vocoders on like neurobass and stuff for a long time, now we're just sending chords through it, right? At least as far as like this particular aesthetic. One thing that I do want to try, which I don't know if I'm going to do today or not, but one thing that you can try is to bounce out a single chord and at 100% reverb that has short reverb on it and put that into a sampler and use that instead as your carrier, because that would, in some cases or another, it's not true convolution, but in some cases or another, you can somewhat use that as an impulse in order to get that effect. And so that can sometimes be kind of cool as well. I need to remind myself, so if you guys are listening or whatever, like let me know, because I haven't fully processed how I want to do that yet. But it could be a cool alternative, right? It could be something that could be interesting to try to maintain something like that. Except what we would do is we would probably use a single chord to throw into the sampler, and then we would play different notes with the bass, and then it would be kind of constituting that specific key. That's what makes sense to me. I don't know if that made sense to you or not, but it could be a cool experiment in that way. And for me, I'm all about sound design, so there's that. All right, let's talk about a couple of other things that can be helpful towards like making this bass actually usable. So the first thing is EQing. On this in particular, we can add just a little bit of, let's pull that back. You can add just a little bit of reverb on the top end, so it doesn't really matter since like everything is cut below this. And then we just want to take out some of the bass frequencies in order to make space for our kind of like low mid bass. Right? Then whenever we kind of start to add everything back into here, we kind of want to start thinking about how to make everything gel and how to make everything louder, because, well, that's what music is. It's loud, meant to be loud. So I think this was the death bell thing, I want to say. Yeah. So we're actually going to take that off for just a second. And we're going to look at some EQ stuff here. Now, if you were to take this off for this particular sound, it would actually be very resonant, so to speak. Let me turn this off and you'll see what I mean. Okay, so if we were to freeze this, look at how freaking crazy this is right here. And part of that is because of the resonances that you get through both the Resonator Bank and then also the vocoder itself. And so to kind of control this, we're going to dip this in such a means to try to make it just a little bit more mild. I'm curious to know what that would look like on another EQ, so we'll take a look at that in just a second. Okay, so it's a little bit more even, but you can still get away with kind of flattening that out a little bit more, but it's better. But that's why I did that, because you can tell that it's just like too freaking peaky. So the next thing that I did was I compressed the hell out of it, which I love the glue compressor from Diatonic. It's Ableton's glue compressor, except it has more makeup gain that you can drive it, or has more drive that you can apply to it. Not that I ever use it, but it's also in Bitwig. If you're in Ableton, just use a regular glue compressor, but turn the peak clip on, which is soft clipping, give it some really heavy compression to try to even it out. And then this multipass is serving as our OTT, so it's pretty much the overachiever preset. You just turn off the super low, the super high band, and then set this anywhere from like, I'd do like 250. I have it at 3K, it doesn't really matter, but like 250, and then this would be at like 3K. It's fine, it doesn't really make that big of a difference, but 3 bands, and then set the mix to like 50% or so. And the cool thing that I like about doing it this way is that even though this is a crap ton more effects, no, it's not. It's only a few dynamics and some gains. But even though it is more, it's more subtle. And subtlety is usually better because like OTT has become such memes of so many other different reasons. Oh, it destroys your phase. Oh, it removes your mids, whatever. This is a little bit more laid back, but you can still get some more high end out of it. And you can always just grab an EQ and push the high end up if that's really what you're chasing. So just keep that in mind. So with all that stuff, we've pretty much got... And then the only thing to do left is to give it some limiting. This is about to get louder. So that's pretty much how this sound comes apart. So like to kind of summarize things, make some kind of FM bass. There's so many different ways to do that. Apply the vocoder. Then as the carrier, or as far as what you're going to send into the vocoder, have some kind of chord progression, generally with supersaws. And we kind of just talked about that, and then you can go back and look at how we did that in the earlier means of this stream in the first place. For this sound, a frequency shift for 140 hertz at 50% may sound cooler before the vocoder. Yeah, and that's definitely one of those things too, right? But like, and those ideas are definitely all possible by all means. But what I wanted to do before we started talking about variations and stuff is how to just get here, how to get this particular sound, or how to start constituting like the fundamental mechanics of what goes into a color base. And that's kind of what I try to do with all my other like I guess bass design videos or sound design videos in general, of like what makes this. But all these other different things, you know, are definitely viable, but those are just like kind of like the cool variations once you understand the fundamentals of how to make that go. Like you don't need a frequency shifter to make the color base. That's not like a key characteristic, but it can be a cool. It can be something that can be useful, or you can place it after the vocoder as well, but still within the chain. So yeah, this is the blue chain. So noise. And that's something that you can automate too in order to like create more cool, I guess, like characteristics or something with that. Color or color base, I have no idea. I'm just rolling with the punches and trying to make what has been requested for me from a long time. Hopefully I'm not disappointing. So like some other things that you can think about too is like, there's a few different things that I think about whenever it comes to this kind of stuff. So we're talking about variation now and all that. Like for me, I'm like, okay, well, why don't we like send this through neural processing? That could be freaking sick. I sent it through a generator just now, but if you were to apply something different, like multipass, where you take the entire signal, and maybe let's say instead of this FM bass, like let's just see if we can like change this into a saw or something. Color bass is what Chimes calls it. It's fine. It's fine. I don't care. But maybe we can take something like this where we turn all this stuff off. That way I don't have to retrace too many steps. And we can grab and make this more so into a res to where we're actually sending the coloring of this into a res base. So I guess like, let me move this, well, let me see what would happen if I just kind of make this stuff sustained for a second. That way we've got a constant influx to be able to hear what this is doing. Okay, so there is some cool stuff that's going on with that in particular, but what am I doing here? Okay, something happens where like this sounds totally blown out of the water. It could be this. Oh, you know what? It's probably because this is too loud. All right, let me back off of the makeup gain. Let me back off of that. Why does that sound so crushed now? Okay, I know why. It's because what we're sending into the vocoder is like double crushing it. So that's why. Yeah, it's hitting the vocoder too hard, but it's not the super saws that are hitting the vocoder. It's the actual modulator, which is pretty funny. Okay. So, and these are problems that like are important to kind of come about this, because these are the kinds of things that you might be running into, right? So let me just take a tool over here and see if I can soften that up a bit. Okay, so that's a lot better. And like doing stuff like this is why you would turn stuff down a lot, is because if you have everything at 100%, then it just goes right, and that doesn't really do a whole lot of good for anybody. But once you kind of get a mix, which is the whole, we're not going to be talking about gain staging, but once you get a mix at like a low volume, then that's when you would bring it back with a limiter or so. That's actually kind of cool. Okay, so like you've got yourself, you know, a cool thing with like a res bass and like your chords on top of that or whatever, but then you can kind of start looking at different options or something like Creature, which is just some neural processing. So I'm using a bandpass on the low end and sending it through some more comb filtering and delay and stuff. But this is why like I'm actually interested in doing this, because like whenever I make neural bass in particular, I don't have it with the constitution of like making it color, so to speak, with resonators and stuff. But a lot of times with short delays, and making things more metallic in that way, you can end up getting something that's somewhat interesting. So I don't know if this is going to be cool or not, but let's take a look. And there we go. We've invented color neurobass. So I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's still trying to apply these different processing chains and these different mindsets in order to create these variations. And that's some of the things that we're looking for, right? One thing that I would like to try, and it's going to take me a lot of work to do, but what I would do and what I would like to do as well is actually have both of these set to record. The problem that I'm going to run into is that Cthulhu doesn't support pitch bend. Wait, does it? No, that's just bass. Okay, so it doesn't support pitch bend, but what would be really cool is if the chords were fleshed out and you had these both set to record at the same time and you had them both pitching to do really cool pitch whips of like pitch whipping a chord or something, right? And I guess like to give like a small detail about how that might sound in particular, what you could do is, and this is just like, this isn't what I would do, but just to kind of like talk about it and just to have a simple means of context is taking something like a delay or even a grain delay, something of the sort. Yeah, fuck it, why not? Let's do that. Let me go to instrument rack. Instrument layer. And then, oh shit, maybe it's an effect layer. Sorry. Effect. Where you at, bruh? There we go. And then I've got a preset here. Custom grain delay. Okay, so I just made a video about this custom grain delay on one of my YouTube shorts. It's pretty much just a delay and a couple of pitch shifters and stuff. But imagine this not being so dirty of a sound as we're getting ready to explore here in just a second. But imagine whipping this entire thing. Yeah, there's some cool stuff in there. And then if you want to go just a little bit more simple, then change this to time mode, set the mix to 100%, make sure that it's the full thing, turn the feedback up, and then you can use this kind of as like scratching or pitch whipping just for the sake of like having a concept of what it could sound like. And that's actually something that could also be really cool as well. So there's a lot of possibilities to explore through that once you kind of have this set up in general. And that's why I think like if Phaseplant pitch slapped, and that's why I think if Phaseplant added a vocoder that you had the ability to add modulators and stuff, like this is why that could be so powerful, because right now, because of the setup of vocoding, like no matter what DAW you're in, you still have to set this up both with chords and it has to be at least 2 tracks. But imagine if, and I'm just like going on a tangent now, but imagine if you just set up like a chord stack right here of like fundamental, 5th, octave. You turn that off, you send that into a vocoder here that this is being sent into, and then like you've got all these different processing options and stuff that you can do in between. That would be money. That would be money. So kilohearts, if you guys are watching this, then that could be an incredible sound design tool. But for now, Ableton has a self-modular setting. Yeah, I'm aware of that. Well, and like the vocoder on here does as well, right? Where you can set the self to modulate. But I'm talking about having an external carrier, right? Because what we could do to kind of explain that is, instead of having this on the audio receiver, and this is a little bit more flexible because this allows us to pretty much have anything sent to it. But what we could do is, instead of having the chord come in from phase plant, you can actually even set this to modulate itself, kind of like what Zebra is talking about. So you just go to phase plant out, and then whenever this is doing shit, it's going to start modulating itself. So like if you've got a chord on this or something, this is a bad chord, but I'll fix it. You probably might want to move this up a bit. Like there's a lot of stuff that you can do with that in particular to get different. So it is an option. It doesn't sound good right now. But if essentially, like, you can have it modulate itself in that way. But I would rather go back to that. So yeah, you can have it do that, but I should probably turn that off. Yeah. What other stuff did we want to talk about with this? Other places to explore. Oh, yeah. So, like, some other stuff that would be really crucial to this in particular is, like, right now we've got just a saw wave or a super saw, which I'll save is just, like, basic super saw. If you guys want this preset, just let me know. Type 1 in the chat, and then I'll just drop it, because I don't really, this is so simple that it's, like, whatever, basic.
Recording to logbook.
Yo, someone just follow. Thank you. But what we can do is, like, we can also change this into different things as well. So we can make it sound... right? Or we can even go, thank you so much, Mr. Krish, for following. But we can also, like, try different stuff, like bells or something in particular, to try to just see what we can come up with. So... and something else that you might want to try is maybe even, like, going into Arpeggiators. And now, like, I'm just kind of being like, all right, well, what about this? What about this? But assuming that, yeah, arpeggiated square, right? Or right now I'm getting ready to do some AM modulation on this to just kind of see what happens if you do that. So... does that not sound like Sonic the Hedgehog? Okay, so you can also do stuff like... shit, you can even do stuff like physical modeling. Where you get into... I'm just going to pull up a preset that I've been doing. So physical modeling 1. And then I'm going to move... what is this set at? G2. Oh, that's fine. Maybe distortion and bit redux on the high end. Maybe. So... let's see, we'll grab this and we'll have the offset maybe to, like, there, and then we'll put the center at C3. Put it at C2 at the same kind of, like, bass-ish idea. Come on. Please. Okay. Fuck. La-da-dee-dow-dow-dow. Homeless Keys. God, I hate that song. So, I mean, like, even something like that, right, could be kind of cool. And so by going back into this and seeing what that sounds like, I mean, I have no idea, but did I turn the vocoding off? Maybe. What did I do? Okay, so I did something to where that's not sending anymore. Group 1, green, phase plant, post, phase plant out. Which is actually kind of cool. And like maybe something that you can even do as well is come back into this and set an LFO on this. Loving the face cam, man. Thanks, bro. Shut up. You can even go into something like that maybe. It's broken, but it is cool. Okay, so what I might try to do instead to make this a little bit more centered around this is instead I'm actually going to use a low pass filter over this, and but anyways, like the key characteristic with this would just be to try to create some kind of bell sound, right? Yeah, so okay, that sounds cooler. So, and then getting that to send into the vocoded chord thing. So it's not just about like the super saws and all that. It's kind of just being like, well, how dude, stop it. That's so gross. It's kind of just being like, how creative can I get with what I send into the vocoder in general, and what other types of things can we explore? And then we also have to bring back the sub within that. Now, obviously, within that top end, we're losing a lot of high frequency. So I guess like again, like just going back and being mindful about how you design this in the first place, right? So like maybe what you can do is grab a new group, go noise, output and just be like really subtle with it in some way or another. Like maybe have this be a little bit more consistent, but send this to lane 2 so that way it ignores all the processing here. Like that could be good. Then you can make it wide. So no matter what, you're still going to have like a little bit of consistent, hey Monad, you still have like a little bit of consistent, God, it's so gross. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not, kind of stuff over that, but coming into that here now. Yeah, like there's a lot of like, just from having that noise layer on top of itself can actually be pretty freaking cool. But now that makes me wonder, like instead of using white noise over that, like what if you changed, like what if you turn this off and instead you use the sampler and you use something different, like some kind of loop or something, right? So maybe something along the lines of some kind of Foley layer, like it could be rain, it could be bacon sizzling, it could be, wait, what was that? Knife, 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 dry. I saw eggs on there somewhere. Glass, horror, knife, no, okay, whatever. Okay, cool. Right, so now you've got something that's like got its own rhythm and stuff, and then I guess like you would just play that to a line. Oh, cool, it's at 140, great. That works out well. Yeah, so you can just set this to different settings or have different loops and all that, and let's see what that sounds like now. How cool is that? That's fucking awesome. You just created or I guess we just created Kirby's Star Rod sound, right? But that's a nice little touch that goes over that. And again, like those are the kinds of things that I would want us to take a look at. Those are the kinds of things that we should be looking to explore as opposed to just being like, here's a super saw, because there's so much variation that you can send into this, if that makes sense, about like the vocoder again is in the middle. What you send into it matters, what goes into it from the outside matters, but just by changing a couple things, like you get a dramatically different sound, but it's still in the realms of creating variation for quote unquote like color base, right? So yeah, that was a pleasant surprise. So yeah, does anybody have any questions on anything? I think that I covered as much as I could. Is there anything that I missed actually in talking about the idea of color base? You guys can let me know in chat. But while we wait for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this really quick, turn this off for just a second, and then I think that I'm just going to take this note. We're going to create just a really quick thing. What note was that? G2. Okay, so for this in particular, I'm actually going to take off this thing and this thing. And then let's move back to let's turn this on for just a second. I'm going to detune this. Okay, that works. So what I'm going to do on this now is I'm going to bounce out this whole thing. Sorry, I'm thinking. Yeah, and then we're actually going to duplicate this. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to pull this up at 100% for just this particular thing. And as you can hear, that gives off that particular characteristic, and it's not convolution reverb by any means. But in theory, what we might be able to do is grab a sampler and then we're just going to set the root note to G2. I went too far. Oh, it's on texture mode. I was like, what is going on? And then what I might also do is just change this to regular repitch mode. Okay, so what we might be able to experiment with now is taking this one, and instead of sending let me just copy this. Instead of sending it through the vocoder to the supersaw line, what we might be able to do to make something interesting is put it on the carrier instead. So we can go there and then go paste. Where did that go? Okay, it went over here. But that's one thing that's really freaking sick about Bitwig, is that we can just bring it over there. And then now we can try to see if we can get that to kind of come out as that. We can also change it to the audio receiver too, but now let's see if that does anything. Okay, so we've got that working. Now let's see if we can get it to work with the color base. Okay, so far it's sending in a signal, but it's not doing the thing. Okay, this is sending a signal. Wait. That's interesting, because normally that would work, and if I were to throw phase plant on this, that typically does work. Usually. What if I Control X? Okay, so we'll do this a long way, and then I'll come back to this. But what we'll do instead is we'll Control V, is we'll delete that, and then is that still there? Yeah. So we'll just grab this, place that there, mute that, delete that, and then we'll grab the audio receiver and send this to, or make sure that this is going to the sampler out in that way, and then oh, okay, well that makes a little bit more sense. I was like, what the fuck? Okay. There we go. Alright, sorry about that, guys. So, yeah, now we can take this So what we might be able to do is that, that. And then we'll have to set this to loop mode. Okay, so it does work. Now, I kind of want to try this one more time just to see now, because for some reason it deleted what I was trying to put in. There we go. Okay, now let's see if this works. There we go, yeah. Okay, so, fuck, this is so cool. Because what you can do with this in particular is now that we've got that, we can actually use a granular synth on this as our vocoder, or as our vocoder carrier. And this is like why Bitwig is so freaking cool. But in essence, right, I can start to manipulate the speed, I can manipulate the grain size as well, and see if we can get something completely different in that way. Where am I? What are you is the bigger question. But yeah, so we can set that to freeze mode, and now this is going to, let's just set that to like 1 bar. Let's see what this does, because this could be really freaking cool. Hi boss. Hey Meta, how are you? So that's kind of cool. It doesn't really give as much of a dramatic effect as I was hoping, but I still think that there's some areas of exploration that can be done in between this. But in any case, you can kind of tell, or you can kind of see rather, that there's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm alive. How are you, man? Hope your pain is okay. Dude, I'm feeling so much better. So I've actually adopted this new training regimen called the ATG system. If you guys have seen that knees over toes guy, he's pretty much just kind of like this. He's well into his adulthood, but he's like 6 foot, doing some crazy dunking and stuff. And he's talking about a lot of stabilizing and mobilizing for your lower back, and then also like bulletproofing your knees and stuff. And I'm like, why didn't I do this before? So he's really opened my eyes to a lot of training specific things for the types of like flips and stuff that I like to do. So it's been really helpful, and my back doesn't hurt. So it's been good things. I'm starting to hear comb filter. Well, yeah, well, obviously, but that's because this is phasing through this placeholder, but then that's being sent as a carrier to the vocoder. So there's a lot of different stuff that you have going through that in that way. But yeah, so like you can take a chord. What did I do? I bounced out a single chord and threw this into the sampler, put 100% reverb on it, and you can kind of use that as a thing to kind of get. It's going to be a different kind of chord, or a different kind of color base, but you can still do that in terms of Bitwig, and this is probably the easiest way to do that in general. which is really freaking sick though. But the other cool thing about why this might work advantageously as well is because it's MPE, and so that means that you can also do like cool pitch bending and stuff, which could be fun. That's pretty neat. What if you turn it into a wavetable? Turn what into a wavetable? Let me grab the note change, I think it's called. Note delay, note latch. It's called something. Note latch, note length, arpeggiator, channel flip. Micro pitch, that'd be getting into something different. Maybe the transposition map. Hey, what up, peeps? Hey, what up, definition? This is new. Okay, well, it still achieves the same thing. That's pretty cool. So with that, you know, of using the transposition map or something else that can, it wouldn't necessarily be through your mod wheel, but through your MIDI. And the reason why you would have to do it that way is because this has MIDI through. Do you still have a stencil morph? Yeah, but like in a wavetable for what? Like what kind of, you mean put the whole thing into a wavetable and put it into a phase plant or what? Do I still have the stencil morph? Yeah, I do. But yeah, I guess I could do it that way too. It's not plugged in right now though. But with the Diatonic Transposer, I think this has more. Yeah, okay, so this has a deeper range of pitch bending, but the reason why is because this is MIDI through. So if you're just doing the mod wheel, then this is only pitching via right here, which I think is actually noted to a CC. But when you actually do the MIDI in this way, which method are you using right now? Sorry, got here late. I've pretty much explored all of them. But right now in particular, I bounced out a chord, put 100% reverb on it. And because like there's no convolution reverb that's native to Bitwig, what I did was instead of, I just put 100% reverb on a single chord, and then I'm using that as the modulator for this. So, but yeah, you can just like look back and watch the rest of the video and stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we covered. There's a little bit of dead air in between, but that's just from me exploring different options and stuff. But now that we have that, because the sampler is on there and we can all do this within a single track, you can just use the mode shift. Wait. Okay, maybe not. That sucks. I was hoping that that would do that or adjust that in real time. There's also one more thing that we can try, which is the multi-note, I think. Maybe not. Let's see. Nope, can't use that. There's another note thing in here that I'm thinking of that you can do pitching with, but I can't remember what it's called. You're always dropping mad science. I guess that's why they call you Alckemy. I really appreciate that. To be honest though, like I call myself Alckemy. That was the old name that I came up with. I'm just glad that it stuck. So there is that. Note latch, note harmonizer. Let's try that one. Let me see what that looks like. Nope. Note filter. No. Multi-note. Channel map. Arpeggiator. No. Yeah, so this would probably be your best bet. This is going to give you the smoothest one as of now. Wait, what was that note pitch shifter? This is what I was looking for. Okay, yeah, I knew that there was there. Imagine being a guy who got to Alckemy before the FMA fans. You know, I don't really get a lot of people that talk to me about Fullmetal Alchemist in that name. But yeah, so with this, I think this will actually adjust in real time. There we go. Okay, so that's the one you want. That one is actually going to adjust because the other ones only like do it on the note reset, where that will actually bend for you, which is pretty cool. So yeah, so right now we covered the sampler version of where you use a single chord, you bounce that out at 100% reverb, then you throw it into a sampler and use that as the vocoder. Then on this one, we did the regular super saw thing, but right now we're actually using like different weird stuff, I want to say. Yeah, what were we doing with this? Oh, right. So we made some kind of like bell thing with this instead of the super saw, and that's kind of why it became. Yeah, so I mean, and we were talking about how to bring more high end back into that in general, which I didn't feel like there was any noise. Yeah, because I turned it off. Oh yeah, and then we tried actually throwing a sampler like a loop into this, and then we ended up getting this really cool shimmer thing. This one is cool. That one's probably my favorite one. But to just kind of be thorough, we also, let me duplicate this. We did just do like a regular boring ass super saw. Let me see. Basic saw, I think is what it was called. Yeah. Okay. So right. So there is that, and then we did, what did we do? 100% reverb on that. I don't know why it's cutting out like that in particular, but I like watching your vids as an FO user because you do great with details. It's amazing practice for recreating these techniques in Patcher. Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, so now for some reason that's kind of cutting off. Wrong. Something. Yeah, I wonder why. But anyways, like you can still hear, this is doing something wonky, but you can still hear the timbre that that's creating, and that's kind of what we were focused on. Oh, it could have been. Could just be something funky with that. There we go. Yeah, so that's why. Love that gate effect. Yeah, so I think what was happening was it was taking the input from this because that was on for some reason. But yeah, so we covered that. The resonator was actually kind of covered in this the entire time. So we actually used, oh, the resonator bank is now on. But we put the resonator bank as a modulator, which is kind of like pre-effects in some way. And then between all of these, we kind of just talked about different variations and stuff that we could do. We also looked into like processing it with like neuro effects, or like a regular neuro style type of thing to get cool variation. We also did some generative stuff out of this where like we took a multi-pass rack and then sent it through like different effect layers and all that stuff. But I really just kind of wanted to take a look at being like, okay, here is what constitutes color base. Here are some options. Zebra had some cool effect or like cool suggestions where we did something with what was it, with the frequency shifter. And then we talked about like the short delays, how you can use that as a resonator. For this particular case, I just used a Resonator Bank because you can just create you can create a 6-note chord out of a single instance, and that makes things a lot easier as opposed to having like a bunch of different resonators or so. And then you can also make them key track together, which is super handy for this type of sound. Was there anything else that we talked about? I don't think so. But the Resonator Bank does a pretty big deal with that. And I guess like one thing that you could try as well is like instead of using the vocoder, you just take that FM bass or whatever. We ended up using like a when I went for the neuro stuff, we ended up turning this into just like a respace. But it started off as like an FM bass or whatever, and you can just go and scroll back to the video to listen to how that sounds. It was nothing serious or nothing crazy, just, you know, like a typical FM with wavetable or whatever. But yeah, like as you can see, like we covered a ton of different options and places and directions to explore in order to like help you make your own color base. And that's really what this was about, as opposed to being like, okay, well, how do we sound like this person? How do we sound like this person? It was more so of like, how do we take the foundation of what this is supposed to sound like? And then how do we figure out different options and ways to make it our own, right? Different options to explore. Not gonna lie, I'm confused. Alckemy making color base. I made color neuro color neuro color. Whatever. Whatever. It's the same shit. But yeah, smack my beer up. So yeah, there was a lot of different aspects and avenues that we explored with this particular sound, but I hope that was helpful to you guys. Do you guys have any questions or like anything else that you want me to take a look at? I'm going to use the restroom really quick, so I'll be right back. But when I come back, what I might do is I might make myself this bowl of rice actually after I use the restroom, and then I'll come back and we can talk about questions and stuff. Uploading this, sick stuff. Yeah, this is like the 8K, the 8,000 subscriber thank you video, I think is what this is going to be. So for all of you people that are subscribers to me that have asked me to do a color-based video, that's why we're doing this. Because you know that to me, like color-based, the genre color-based is pretty memes to me, of being like, of constituting as like a color base or whatever. But as far as this being a helpful tutorial, yeah, why would I want to hold you back from that kind of information? My only reservation was like, I didn't actually know how to do this. So I had to just sit down with it and explore a little bit and try to fiddle with it. And I watched some other tutorials and stuff. I don't really even remember what they were, but I wanted to just make sure that I knew how to create the timbre and get the qualities that make this particular kind of sound. So that way, like, I could do that confidently. But that's why I decided to stream it too, was because like this is actually the first time that I've ever made anything like this. Like this was attempt number 1, just right here. It was just, how do I make this particular sound? And I might have lucked out. It turned out pretty okay. But because I have you guys here, like you guys, in case if I got lost or something, I think that I did pretty okay. But I think like if I ever got lost or something, you guys would be able to help me out or something. So I was kind of just having you in my back pocket to make sure that I wasn't doing something stupid. Might have to just bump that genre up to next month. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to do this. It's, call it what you want. The genre doesn't matter. I think it's fine to call the actual sound color base, but it's just kind of, it's melodic rhythm. Whatever, call it what you want. There also isn't one formula for the sound. Exactly, and that's what I wanted to explore, right? That's what